Hello and welcome back. We made it through prior lectures 12 and 13 with the whole resistance versus endurance training discussion. We are up to lecture 14. We're going to start with the basics here in terms of normal pH, buffer systems, thermal regulations, and then we're going to apply that to hydration, sodium balance, and performance. Again, Bloom's taxonomy for your reference. In this video, some students in some of the prior ones have asked for actually a little bit more practice to help them prepare for the test. So I'm going to try this out. We're going to have 15 questions on this quiz. We're going to start more with level 2, some solid, just basic understanding questions to make sure all the foundations are clear here. And then we're going to progressively move up into the analyze and evaluate real world scenarios. So basically, if you can move comfortably from the definitions up to decision making, basically from remember and understand to evaluate and analyze, then you're exactly where you need to be for the exam. So here we go, question 1. Which statement best describes acid-base balance during exercise? Lactate accumulation directly causes muscle acidosis. Blood pH is unregulated during exercise. Multiple buffering systems act together to limit pH changes. Only the lungs regulate exercise pH, or pH changes are unrelated to performance. And this answer is C. Multiple buffering systems act together to limit the pH changes. So exercise, of course, challenges your acid-base balance, but coordinated buffering in your muscle, in your blood, and in the respiratory system all limit very harmful pH shifts to the body. So they all work in concert. Question 2. Which buffer system is most important inside skeletal muscle during high-intensity exercise? Is it A, hemoglobin, B, albumin, C, carnosine, D, carbonic acid, or E, sodium? So this one is C. So carnosine is really ideally suited to buffer hydrogen ions at exercise-relevant pH levels within the muscle cells, by the way, which is called pKa for the chemists out there. We're going to do a little side note, FYI, on pKa. That really tells us where a buffer is most effective. So during high-intensity exercise, your muscle pH drops as hydrogen ions, of course, accumulate, and pKa is the pH level at which a buffer is technically half full, or more precisely, it's really the pH of where half the buffer is holding hydrogen ions and half is not, ready to buffer. Carnosine's pKa is right in that range, which means it's really well positioned to buffer acid exactly when the muscle needs it most when it's exercising. Basically, at that point in exercise, that buffer can both accept and release hydrogen ions very easily because it's right at that pKa, which is why the buffering works very well. So when muscle pH during intense exercise falls down near the carnosine's pKa, carnosine is really in its kind of ideal working range, which is why carnosine matters in fast twitch muscle fibers, because it's just basically working at the right pH at the right time to the pKa level. All right, back on track. Question 3. Which blood buffer is responsible for transporting CO2 and regulating pH via respiration? Is it carboxyhemoglobin, hemoglobin, carnosine, lactate, or myoglobin? This one hopefully is straightforward. Hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin is a buffer. Yes, it buffers hydrogen ions generated from CO2, and it facilitates, of course, CO2 removal via the lungs. Kind of interesting sort of fun fact, hemoglobin contributes pretty significantly, about 50 to 60% of the total buffering capacity of the whole blood. So it is really acting as a nice sink or sponge for hydrogen ions. Deoxygenated hemoglobin, or deoxy-HB, really has a very high affinity for hydrogen ions, which is why buffering works best in the capillaries of tissues. Question 4. The group of specialized neurons at the floor of the brain that acts as a quote-unquote thermostat is called the pituitary, thyroid, hypothalamus, adrenals, or brainstem. I hope your adrenals are not up in your brain. It's the hypothalamus, which integrates, of course, your core and peripheral temperature inputs and orchestrates things like sweating, vasodilation, and even the shivering response when you're cold. Question 5. Increased heat production during cold exposure results partly from epinephrine and norepinephrine secreted from the what? Thyroid, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal medulla, or pancreas. This one is the adrenal medulla, which releases, of course, epi and norepi, which increase your metabolic heat production during cold exposure and stress. Question 6. Voluntary dehydration refers to what? So think about this one. Is it intentional fluid restriction, dehydration caused by sweating, inadequate drinking despite fluid availability, sodium depletion during exercise, or exercise-induced hyponatremia? This one's a little tricky if you just kind of jump to the answer quickly. It's inadequate drinking despite the fluid availability. So athletes often, unfortunately, fail to replete losses even when fluids are readily available, which is the definition of voluntary dehydration. It kind of sounds funny, but at 5Ks, half marathons, and marathons, maybe not 5Ks, people are just running right by the aid station when they really should be at least getting a little bit of drinking in. Yes, you can overload yourself and get waterlogged, but many athletes, unfortunately, practice voluntary dehydration, which is not a good training format. Question 7. Adding sodium to beverages during endurance exercise helps primarily by increasing sweat rate, reducing thirst, improving fluid retention, lowering heart rate, or preventing lactate production. And this one hopefully is straightforward. It's improving fluid retention. So sodium helps preserve your plasma osmolality in your blood and reduces, hopefully, excessive urine production, which therefore improves hydration status. Question 8. Water replacement with added sodium is unnecessary endurance exercise, restores water and electrolyte balance faster than water alone, does not affect thirst, is required only during resistance training, or increases urine output. Again, hopefully structured the question to make it easy. This restores water and electrolyte balance faster. So sodium helps maintain your plasma osmolality. It, so to speak, supports your thirst mechanism with a little bit of sodium in there. And it does reduce excessive urine production, which really means rehydration becomes more effective and faster. Question 9, dehydration during exercise. A is a training technique to improve lactate threshold, hopefully not. B causes hyponatremia. C is dangerous if we lose 1 to 2% body weight. D may occur when runners drink ad libitum, or E improves thermoregulation. And this one is D, may occur when runners drink ad libitum. So this is that drinking to thirst, which really often, unfortunately, fails to match the fluid losses during prolonged endurance exercise, leading again to that voluntary dehydration, even when fluids are readily available. All right, moving up again to the analyze level. Number 10, acidosis during intense exercise is most directly related to A, lactate accumulation, B, ATP hydrolysis and H+ release, C, reduced oxygen availability, D, muscle fiber damage, or E, sodium loss. And this one is B, ATP hydrolysis and H+ release. So the primary source of acidosis is H+ generated during ATP breakdown, not the lactate itself, right? Lactate is not our enemy. All right, a couple more, 5 more questions here. Which of the following is not an effect of dehydration on performance? Decreased circulatory capacity, decreased endurance, increased body temperature, increased perceived exertion, or decreased heart rate. And this one is decreased heart rate. So dehydration reduces plasma volume, which raises heart rate to maintain cardiac output. It does not lower it. Question 12, why does ventilation increase during intense exercise? Is it A, to raise blood pH, B, to increase oxygen diffusion only, C, to remove CO2 and limit acidosis, D, to cool skeletal muscle, or E, to stimulate the hypothalamus? And this one is C, to remove CO2 and limit acidosis. So increased respiration removes excess CO2, which shifts that bicarbonate buffer system and helps stabilize the overall blood pH. Question 13, which activity would most strongly perturb blood pH? Is it A, walking, B, long slow distance running, C, heavy resistance training, D, sprint intervals, or E, yoga? Hopefully it's not yoga. It's D, sprint intervals. You'd be doing the wrong kind of yoga if you're getting a significant pH disturbance. It's those short, intense efforts that rely really heavily on glycolysis, producing a very quick H+ accumulation and that marked pH disturbance. All right, we're up to the top level at Evaluate. Question 14, exercise-associated hyponatremia is best described as sodium loss due to sweating, dehydration with elevated sodium, excessive water intake diluting plasma sodium, D, inadequate carbohydrate intake, or E, failure of aldosterone release. And exercise-associated hyponatremia results from consuming more fluid than lost, diluting plasma sodium to dangerous levels, so it's answer C. And the last one, question 15. Why can, quote, drinking to thirst fail during endurance events? A little quick spaced repetition and a callback from earlier this quiz. Is it A, thirst overestimates fluid needs, B, thirst is suppressed by exercise, C, gastric emptying limits intake rate, D, blocks sodium thirst, or E, sweat rate decreases? And this answer is C, gastric emptying limits intake rate. So kind of a curveball now. So even when thirst is present, gastric emptying and absorption can limit just how fast fluids can be replaced. So that was kind of a fun one to end with. I've experienced that in like long endurance races where it's like a 4-hour race and you just can't feel like you can get in enough fluid, and it's all the gastric emptying. All right, that's it. See you in the next video.